rain fell in steady sheets over Barcelona's Gothic quarter, the cobblestone streets glistening under the dim yellow glow of old street lamps. Isla Moreno pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, balancing a leather portfolio under one arm as she stepped out of the grand doors of the art museum. The charity auction had gone well, but she felt the same post-event weariness she always did, part relief, part loneliness. She was halfway down the narrow street when her heel caught on the uneven stone. She stumbled, the portfolio slipping from her arm, and before she could recover, a hand caught hers, steadying her. "Careful," a deep, warm voice said. She looked up into the striking face of a tall man with rain-slicked dark hair and a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His smile was slow, the kind that seemed to notice only her in a city full of strangers. "Are you all right?" Ela nodded, slightly breathless. "Yes, thank you. My fault. These streets aren't kind to heels." He glanced at her portfolio, stooping to pick it up before she could. "You work at the museum?" "I'm the curator," she said, adjusting her grip. "Tonight was a charity auction." "Then I owe you my thanks," he said, his Italian accent smooth and deliberate. "I'm Luca. I was at the auction, though I admit I was more interested in the conversation at my table than the art." His eyes held hers, making her forget for a moment about the chill in the air. They fell into step together, their umbrellas nearly touching as they walked through the winding streets. Conversation came easily, about art, about travel, about Barcelona's hidden corners that tourists rarely saw. Luca spoke with the kind of attention that made Isla feel like each of her words mattered, as if there was nowhere else he'd rather be than in the rain with her. By the time they reached the Plaza Real, the rain had softened to a mist. Luca gestured toward a small cafe, still open on the corner. "Have a coffee with me. It would be a tragedy to let this night end without knowing more about you." Ela hesitated, a voice deep inside reminding her why she'd stopped entertaining these moments years ago, after a betrayal that had left her trust fractured and her heart guarded. But something about him, his easy confidence, the warmth in his smile, pushed against that wall. They sat by the window, the cafe's dim light pooling around them as they talked. He asked about her favorite artists, and she asked about his business ventures, though his answers were vague, wrapped in charm. Time slipped away unnoticed, and when she finally stood to leave, Luca took her hand again, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Barcelona is full of beautiful things," he said softly, "but tonight I found my favorite." As she walked home through the quiet streets, Isla felt a strange warmth spreading in her chest. She told herself it was just a pleasant encounter, nothing more. But even as she lay in bed later, listening to the rain against her window, she knew the walls she had so carefully built were already beginning to crack. The first week after their meeting, Luca called Ela every evening, never letting a day pass without hearing her voice. By the second week, the calls had turned into dinners, each one more elaborate than the last. One night, it was a rooftop restaurant overlooking the twinkling lights of Barcelona, a private table surrounded by candlelight and fresh flowers. Another night, it was an exclusive gallery opening where the city's most influential collectors nodded in greeting to Luca as if he were one of their own. He always arrived in a sleek, black car, the driver stepping out to open her door. He carried himself with an ease that suggested wealth wasn't something he flaunted, but something he wore like a second skin. When he leaned in to speak, his voice lowered to an intimate murmur, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. He told her about summers in Capri, about his dream of owning a vineyard in Tuscany, and about a life where art, travel, and love could all exist in one unbroken thread. Ela found herself swept along, barely questioning the pace. It felt intoxicating to be chosen, to be seen in this way after years of keeping her heart in hiding. She started wearing dresses she hadn't touched in months, laughing more, and looking forward to his messages that came at odd hours. Short lines like "thinking of you" or "you'd love the view from here." Still, Sophia noticed. Over brunch one Sunday, she studied Isla with a worried frown. You've known him, what, 3 weeks? And he's already talking about vacations and future plans? Isla, men who move this fast usually have something they don't want you to find out. Isla stirred her coffee, avoiding her friend's eyes. Not Luca. He's different. He listens. He makes time for me. It doesn't feel forced. Sophia leaned forward. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. You don't know him yet. But Isla pushed the doubt aside. When Luca texted that afternoon, "Meet me at the marina at 7, she didn't hesitate. That evening, she found herself stepping onto the deck of a private yacht, the scent of salt and sea air mixing with the soft music playing in the background. As the city lights faded behind them, Luca poured her a glass of champagne and told her she deserved a life where every day felt like this. The more time she spent with him, the more she let the comfort of his presence blur the questions she should have been asking. There were moments when she noticed small things, how he avoided specifics about his work, how his phone calls would shift to another language and tone when he stepped away. But each time, he would return with a smile or a kiss that made her forget. The evening at the gallery began like any other of Luca's carefully arranged nights. Her dress chosen by him, her arrival on his arm, champagne flutes passed between them as they moved through the crowd. The air smelled faintly of varnish and fresh paint, the murmur of voices blending with soft classical music. Isla was admiring a large abstract piece when she felt a light tap on her shoulder. She turned to find a woman in her mid-40s, her eyes sharp and heavy with something unspoken. "You're with Luca Moretti, aren't you?" the woman asked, her voice low but firm. "Yes," Isla replied cautiously. The woman's lips tightened. "Be careful. That man ruined my sister's life, left her with nothing after promising her everything." Before Isla could respond, Luca appeared at her side, his smile polite, but his grip on her arm just a little too firm. "Ah, Rosa," he said smoothly. "Still spreading the same old stories? My dear, you'll forgive her. She's bitter. Years ago, I had to let her go from my company, and she's never forgiven me." Without another glance at the woman, he steered Isla toward the other side of the room. For the rest of the evening, Isla tried to shake the encounter from her mind, but Rosa's words lingered like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. Luca was attentive as ever, his charm polished, but she noticed how quickly he had shut the conversation down. Later that night, back at Luca's apartment, Isla was pouring herself a glass of water in the kitchen when she heard his voice from the balcony. He was speaking in rapid Italian, his tone clipped and urgent, a far cry from the slow, deliberate way he spoke to her. She caught fragments, numbers, dates, something about handling it before the shipment. His back was to her, his free hand gripping the balcony railing. When he finally ended the call and stepped inside, she asked gently, "Who was that?" Luca's eyes softened immediately, as though he just remembered she was there. "Just business. Nothing for you to worry about." "What kind of business?" she pressed. He smiled faintly, brushing her hair back from her face. "The kind that keeps all this running." He gestured to the apartment, the city lights beyond. "I don't want to bore you with the details." Then he kissed her forehead and suggested they open a bottle of wine. Isla let the subject drop, but as she sat beside him on the couch, the taste of the wine felt different. Sweet on her tongue, but edged with something she couldn't name. For the first time since meeting him, a small seed of doubt had taken root. The drive to Lake Como felt like something out of a dream. The road curved along the water's edge, the late afternoon sun turning the lake into sheets of gold. Luca's villa stood on a hill overlooking the quiet town, its pale stone walls wrapped in ivy, terraces lined with terracotta pots of lavender. Isla had never seen a place so beautiful. From the moment they arrived, Luca seemed softer, more at ease. He cooked for her in the open kitchen, opening a bottle of red wine he said he'd been saving for years. They ate on the terrace, the lights of the small villages across the water flickering like stars. That night, the air between them grew warmer, charged with a closeness that had been building for weeks. In his arms, the world felt far away. No Rosa, no strange phone calls, no questions she wasn't ready to ask. The next morning, after breakfast, they walked along the garden path behind the villa. The lake glimmered between the trees, and Luca's voice took on a tone she hadn't heard before. Low, almost hesitant. He told her about his childhood in Naples, about growing up in a cramped apartment with peeling walls and empty cupboards. He spoke of watching his mother cry over unpaid bills, of feeling powerless. I had to do things, he said quietly, things I'm not proud of, but it was the only way to change my life. And now, that part of me is over. With you, I want something better, something clean. His eyes searched hers as if for permission to believe his own words. Isla felt the weight of his confession, the vulnerability beneath his polished exterior. She told herself that everyone had a past, that survival sometimes left stains you couldn't wash out. And in that moment, she believed him. It was only later, while unpacking her bag in the guest room, that she noticed the old wooden chest in the corner, half covered by a folded blanket. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were scattered papers, an old leather jacket, and a small stack of photographs. One of them stopped her cold. In the picture, a younger Luca stood beside a man she recognized from a brief introduction in Barcelona, Mateo, his business partner. Both were smiling, their hands gripping the handle of a black briefcase. The latch was open, and inside were neat stacks of cash. It didn't look like a business deal. It looked like a transaction meant to be hidden. Ila quickly replaced the photo and closed the chest, her heart thudding in her ears. She told herself there could be an explanation, but the image stayed in her mind, vivid and unsettling. When she joined Luca on the terrace for lunch, he greeted her with the same warmth as always. Yet as he poured her wine, she couldn't help wondering what else he had locked away in that villa, and whether his past was truly behind him at all. Back in Barcelona, the rhythm of their days shifted in ways Isla didn't notice at first. Luca began suggesting what she should wear to dinners, at first as playful advice, later as firm instruction. "That red dress tonight," he would say, handing it to her before she even opened her wardrobe. At events, his hand stayed at the small of her back, guiding her towards certain people and away from others. He started asking more questions about her schedule. If she stayed late at the gallery, his calls would come one after another, his voice tight. "Who's there with you? Why are you still working? You know you don't have to push yourself like this." It sounded like concern, but the way his eyes searched hers when she came home made it feel more like suspicion. Meanwhile, Sophia's unease had grown into action. While Isla was swept up in Luca's invitations and private weekends, Sophia had been making quiet inquiries. One afternoon, she showed up at the gallery, her expression grim. "I found something," she said, lowering her voice. "Luca's name is tied to at least 6 shell companies. They're registered in different countries, all with no clear business activity." "That's not normal, Isla." Isla crossed her arms. "You've been digging into his life? Without telling me?" "Because you're not asking the questions you should," Sophia shot back. "Men like this." "Stop," Isla interrupted, sharper than she meant. "You don't know him like I do. You're judging him based on paper, not on who he is with me." Sophia's voice softened, but the warning in it remained. "I'm judging based on patterns, Isla, and this doesn't end well. I just don't want you to get hurt." The fight hung between them, leaving an ache in Isla's chest long after Sophia left. That night, Luca noticed her quiet mood and pulled her close on the couch. "Something's wrong," he said, watching her face. She thought about telling him, about asking outright if the companies were his. But then he kissed her temple and murmured about planning a trip to Paris, and the question slipped back into the shadows. She told herself it was love that made her choose him over doubt. Yet deep down, She felt the first real fracture in the trust she had built around him. It happened late one evening after a small exhibition at the gallery. The streets were quiet, the air cool with the scent of rain from earlier in the night. Isla walked toward her car in the dimly lit underground parking lot, her heels echoing against the concrete. She was fishing for her keys when a shadow stepped out from behind a pillar. Mateo. She froze, her pulse quickening. He wore a dark coat, his hands deep in his pockets, but his voice was low and deliberate. "Stop asking questions about Luca," he said, his Italian accent sharper than Luca's. "It's not safe for you. You're important to him. Don't make yourself a problem." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the stairwell without a glance back. The sound of the door closing felt louder than it should have. Driving home, her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She replayed the scene over and over. The way Mateo's eyes had no warmth, the way he'd spoken as if danger was already circling her. By the time she reached Luca's apartment, the fear had shifted into something heavier, a need for the truth. She found him in the study, leaning over a laptop. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. He looked up, his brow tightening. "About what?" "Mateo cornered me tonight. He told me to stop asking questions. What is going on, Luca? What are you hiding from me?" Luca shut the laptop slowly, leaning back in his chair. For a moment, he just studied her, as if weighing how much to give away. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I never wanted you to know this part of my life." "Tell me," she insisted. He stood, walked to the window, and spoke without turning to her. "The truth is, I built my fortune in ways I'm not proud of. Illegal art trafficking, moving pieces across borders without papers, and yes, money laundering. It was business, Isla. That's all it ever was." Her stomach nodded. "You've been lying to me this whole time." "I didn't lie about how I feel," he said quickly, finally facing her. "I'm done with that world. For you. I've been making plans to step away for months." She shook her head, torn between anger and disbelief. "You think saying it was for me makes it better?" His expression softened, almost pleading. "It means I have something worth leaving it all behind for. You. Please, don't walk away from me now." Isla felt the words pulling at her, tugging at the part of her that still remembered the nights on the yacht, the dinners under the stars, the way he made her feel seen. But underneath, there was the cold truth. He was dangerous, and being with him meant being part of a world she never wanted to enter. Yet as she stood there, staring into his eyes, she realized she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The first threat arrived 2 nights later. Isla came home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing seemed stolen, but on the kitchen counter sat a single sheet of paper, blank except for one line in block letters: "You're next." Her breath caught, the paper trembling in her hand. The message was unsigned, but she didn't need to guess who it was meant for. She called Luca immediately. Within minutes, he was at her door, his face pale but his voice steady. "Pack a bag," he said. "You're coming with me." She hesitated. "Luca, maybe we should go to the police." "No." His tone was final, almost sharp. "The police can't protect you from the people I've dealt with. I can." By the end of the hour, she was standing in the penthouse suite of his high-rise apartment. The city lights glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the beauty of the view felt distant, irrelevant. Luca locked the door and gave instructions to a man posted in the hallway. Another face she didn't recognize, another reminder that her life was now surrounded by strangers whose loyalty belonged to him. In the days that followed, Luca rarely let her out of his sight. If she went to the gallery, he sent a driver. If she met a friend, he insisted on knowing the location and the time she'd return. At night, his phone rang in bursts, short conversations in Italian, filled with clipped sentences and long silences. When she asked, he told her it was just business cleanup. The safety he promised began to feel like a cage. She missed her small apartment, the freedom to walk through the streets without an escort. Now every sound outside the door made her tense. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to follow her. Sophia tried to reach her. Calls, messages, but Ela avoided answering. She didn't know how to explain the truth without sounding like she had already chosen her side. And in a way, she had. One night, as they sat on the balcony, the city sprawling beneath them, Luca took her hand. "When this is over, we'll disappear somewhere no one can touch us. You'll have the life you've always wanted." She looked at him, at the man who had become both her refuge and her danger, and wondered if she still knew what she wanted at all. It was raining again the night Isla reached her breaking point. Luca had left early for what he called a meeting that couldn't wait, leaving her alone in the penthouse. Restless, she wandered into his study, a room he always kept locked but had forgotten to secure that evening. The desk was immaculate, but a folder lay open near the edge, as if it had been left there in a hurry. Inside were photographs, charred ruins of a warehouse, police tape fluttering in the wind, and a grainy image of firefighters carrying out a covered body. Clipped to the folder was a printed article in French, "Incendie criminel dans un entrepôt de Paris," arson in a Paris warehouse. One line in the report made her throat tighten. Sources alleged the fire was linked to an illegal art shipment originating in Barcelona. Her stomach turned. She thought about the vague business trips, the calls in Italian, the shadows that seemed to follow them. This wasn't just his past, it was still happening. When Luca returned, dripping from the rain, she was waiting in the living room, the folder on the table between them. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice low but shaking. He glanced at the folder and exhaled slowly as though bracing for a storm. "It was a deal that went bad. I didn't light the fire, Isla." "But you were part of it," she pressed, rising to her feet. "Someone died, Luca, an innocent man." His jaw tightened. "This is exactly why I didn't want you involved. You see one piece of the puzzle and think you know the whole picture. That's enough for me to know I'm with someone capable of ruining lives," she shot back. His voice rose, the charm stripped away. "And what about the life I've given you? The protection? The chances you'd never have without me? Don't pretend you didn't choose this." The words cut deep because, in some twisted way, they were true. She had chosen to stay, to believe him, to ignore every warning. Now, the weight of that choice pressed on her chest until she could hardly breathe. Luca's anger softened, his voice lowering again. "I did it all for us. One more deal, and I'm out. I promise." She didn't answer. She turned away, staring out at the rain-slick streets below, knowing that if she stayed, the line between love and survival would vanish completely. Isla waited until Luca left for another final meeting before she acted. The moment the door closed behind him, she moved quickly, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew where he kept his laptop, and she knew the password, something she'd memorized months ago without telling him. She connected a small external drive Sophia had once given her just in case, and began copying everything she could find: emails, spreadsheets, scanned contracts. The deeper she dug, the worse it became. There were invoices for art pieces never officially sold, transfers through offshore accounts, and records tying his shell companies to the Paris warehouse fire. Halfway through, she heard the elevator chime. Panic surged. She yanked the drive from the laptop, shoving it into her coat pocket just as Luca stepped inside. He froze when he saw her at the desk. "What are you doing?" Her mind scrambled for an answer, but her voice betrayed her. "I needed to check something for the gallery." He took a slow step forward, his gaze dropping to the open laptop. "You've been in my files." "Luca, He cut her off, his voice low, almost wounded. "After everything, you still don't trust me." Her heart pounded. "You gave me every reason not to." For a long moment, he just stared at her, the anger in his eyes dulled by something else, fear. Not for himself, but for her. "Do you have any idea what happens to people who cross the men I work with?" he asked quietly. "If you turn this over, you're not just ending me. You're painting a target on your back." She swallowed hard. Then maybe ending you is the only way to save myself. They stood in silence, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Luca stepped back, his face unreadable. If you walk out that door, there's no coming back. Her hands trembled as she picked up her bag. I know. By midnight, she was on a train to Paris, Sophia waiting at the other end. The drive stayed hidden in her pocket, a weight both terrifying and liberating. She knew this wasn't over. Luca wasn't the kind of man to let someone walk away. But for the first time in months, she could breathe without feeling like every inhale belonged to him. Ela was sitting in a small cafe on the left bank in Paris when the headline flashed across the television above the counter. Italian businessman Luca Moretti arrested in international art crime sting. The report showed grainy footage of Luca being led out of a villa in handcuffs, flanked by stern-faced officers. Even through the screen, she recognized the familiar defiance in his gaze. Head high, jaw set, as if he could still charm his way out of the inevitable. The authorities credited an anonymous source for providing the evidence that led to the arrests of multiple figures in the illegal art trade. Isla stirred her coffee, watching the images without flinching. The drive she had smuggled out of his apartment was locked away in Sophia's office, its contents now scattered through the hands of investigators across Europe. In the weeks since her escape, she had built a quiet routine. Morning walks along the Seine, afternoons helping Sophia with legal research for her firm. Her heart still carried the weight of what she'd lived through, but the grip of it was loosening. One evening, standing by the river as the sun dipped low, she let herself remember the early days, the rooftop dinners, the yacht on the marina, the way his hand felt steadying hers in the rain. She could still love those moments without loving the man who gave them to her. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Sophia. It's over. He's not getting out this time. Isla smiled faintly, a mix of relief and something she couldn't quite name. Love, she realized, could be beautiful and brutal all at once, but the most dangerous kind was the one built on lies. As she walked away from the river, the lights of Paris glimmering behind her, she knew she'd never see Luca again. And if she did, it wouldn't matter. She had already said her goodbye, long before the world saw him in chains.